It's February 28, 2025. I'm Todd Dunn, and I wanted to clarify something I said yesterday in my video about Bar Harbor. I mentioned that the reason I went to Bar Harbor was because I had a doctor's appointment. And, the doctor was pretty positive, said that I don't have anything to worry about right now. But I wanted to go into it in a little bit more detail. The doctor I saw was my oncologist. Yeah, that means that I have cancer. But it means that I do have a type of cancer that develops slowly over time. And what's being done with me right now is they're simply monitoring the progression of the cancer. And so I get a blood test every 6 months, and right now I'm in a cycle of seeing the doctor once a year. And yesterday he told me, okay, we'll just continue that. You'll have a blood test in 6 months. If things have accelerated, I'll see you then, but most likely I'll see you in a year. So I am a retired professor, and I'm a little bit, I like to know what's going on with my body. So when I was diagnosed with this chronic lymphocytic leukemia 9 years ago, I set out to learn everything I could about it, which means that I started by reading a sort of 4,000-page hematology book, which is a book about blood and blood diseases. And then I read all of the scientific literature about chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is the leukemia that I have, and read up on all of the treatments and the history of the treatments, and went through all the clinical trial reports. Basically, I learned everything there was to learn about the disease. The only thing that I didn't learn was the clinical aspects of the disease, because obviously I'm not a medical doctor, just a run-of-the-mill PhD. So I don't have clinical experience. I could only read reports, but that's very different from actually having the hands-on experience. So anyway, as I said, I have chronic lymphocytic leukemia. What's that mean? What is chronic lymphocytic leukemia? Well, it's a blood cancer. And what it consists of is there is a particular type of white blood cell called a lymphocyte, in this case a B lymphocyte, that in my case has undergone a mutation. And that mutation did basically two things to the lymphocyte. It made it much longer lived than normal. And the other change is that it made it so that it isn't as effective as a normal lymphocyte in doing its job. So what's the job of a B lymphocyte? Well, B lymphocytes are the particular white blood cells that produce antibodies. So that if you get an infection, your B lymphocytes will produce antibodies against that specific infection or whatever virus, and those antibodies will attach to the bacterium or the virus, and other blood cells will then kill it. Well, the mutated B lymphocytes that I have don't produce antibodies very well, and they live a long time. The result is that they tend to accumulate in your blood, and the number of lymphocytes in your blood goes up continuously with time when you have chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And eventually it gets to the point where they're so abundant that they start getting into your lymph nodes, your spleen, your liver, and into your bone marrow, where they can crowd out other cells and cause your bone marrow, where normal blood cells are produced, to not produce enough red blood cells, for example, or platelets, or other essential blood cells, and you can become anemic, or what's called thrombocytopenic, when you don't have enough platelets, which can cause you to have bleeding disorders. Anyway, it's not good. That happens at very high lymphocyte counts. So what they're doing with me right now is simply monitoring my lymphocyte count in my blood. So I go in once every 6 months. They take a blood test and called a complete blood count, which determines, a number of things about my blood, my red blood cell count, my total white cell count, my lymphocyte count, hemoglobin in my red blood cells, etc. And my doctor looks at those numbers and comes to conclusions about how I'm doing, coupled with a quick examination to see if I have any enlarged lymph nodes or anything like that. So anyway, that's fine, and he told me that I'm good to go. But, as I said, I'm curious about these things, so I always get a copy of my blood test results, and that comes to me online. The hospital does delay when I can see it until after I've seen the doctor, and I didn't get the numbers until last night, but now I've looked at them, and I wanted to talk about them a little bit. Now remember, I spent a lot of time studying this disease, and I know a lot about it, so I can interpret my own blood results very well. So this slide shows my blood results for the last 2 years. Oh, let me go back and say one other thing first. I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia 9 years ago. At the point that I was diagnosed, I was at a fairly advanced stage in the disease, and consequently I went into treatment only 2 years after diagnosis. And my treatment was successful. It suppressed the disease to the point where they couldn't detect it anymore, but none of the treatments for chronic lymphocytic leukemia actually cure the disease. It always comes back, and my chronic lymphocytic leukemia has now come back. But my treatment was supposed to suppress the disease for about 2 years and 9 months, and it seems to have done it for almost 7 years. So I'm not dissatisfied with that result. Anyway, let's take a look at some blood results. Basically, I only have 2 blood parameters here. I have in the one column the date when the blood test was done, and these tests go back 2 years to February 6, 2023. And the parameters I'm looking at are the lymphocyte count, how many lymphocytes there are in my blood. Again, these are a white blood cell. And the hemoglobin content of my red blood cells. Hemoglobin is an indicator of whether or not I'm anemic. And chronic lymphocytic leukemia can cause significant anemia. So let's take a look at these numbers and see how they've progressed. At the very top there, I have the normal range. For lymphocytes, the normal range is between 1 and 4.5. Now, I'm not going to bother you with the units, but that's what the range is. And for hemoglobin, for my hospital, for men, the normal range is 14 to 18. So 2 years ago, February 6, 2023, my lymphocyte count was within the normal range at 3.95, and my hemoglobin count at 16.1 was right smack in the middle of the normal range. That was great. Not really a problem. In June of 2023, my lymphocyte count had increased to 5.24, so it was a little bit above the normal range, but not enough that the test could say, yes, the chronic lymphocytic leukemia is back. And my hemoglobin had dropped a little bit, down to 15.3. I, at the time, thought it was partly due to the fact that I had my knee replacement surgery at the end of February, and that made me quite anemic due to blood loss at the time, and the fact that they pumped me full of IV fluids. Then, in November of 23, my lymphocyte count had jumped up to 9.05. So that's a pretty big increase, almost an 80% increase in about 5 months. And my hemoglobin had dropped a little bit more. And then a year ago, in February last year, my lymphocyte count had actually dropped a little, although the difference between 9.05 and 8.64 isn't really significant. My hemoglobin dropped a little bit, but it was more or less stable. And then last fall in September, my lymphocyte count had gone down further to 8.12, and my hemoglobin had rebounded a little bit. So that was good. I was beginning to wonder if the disease really was coming back. But on Tuesday of this week, my lymphocyte count had jumped again by about 60% to 12.95. That is definitely high enough that it says that the chronic lymphocytic leukemia is back. And now 12.95 is not a particularly high lymphocyte count for somebody with CLL. When I went into treatment 7 years ago, my lymphocyte count was 145. So 13 is not anything to worry about, as my doctor said. But more concerning to me is the fact that my hemoglobin, which is the protein in your red blood cells that transports oxygen, had dropped to 13.3. That's below the lower limit of the normal range. So what it's saying is my CLL is definitely back. My lymphocyte count is up quite a bit over 6 months. And my hemoglobin is down, and I'm now a little bit anemic. I have mild anemia. So what we're going to be looking at is what happens in 6 months. Is this trend going to continue? Is my lymphocyte count going to jump up again to say 20? And is my hemoglobin going to continue to go down? If that's the case, then we might have to look at treating me, either for the CLL or for whatever's causing the hemoglobin to drop off. Now, one of the problems with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, or CLL, is that it can cause very dramatic anemia, and it can come on pretty fast. And so when that happens, that's what they call autoimmune anemia, and where your B lymphocytes start producing antibodies against your red blood cells. That's not good. And that can result in you being treated not for the chronic lymphocytic leukemia, but for the production of antibodies that are attacking your red blood cells. And so that's something that I want to keep an eye on. And so that's kind of where we are right now. I think my doctor was a little more optimistic than he should have been. He seemed to think that everything was fine and dandy. Yeah, I think that 6 months might be too long to wait for the next blood test. I might call up and see if I can schedule something a little earlier. And the other thing that I will do is I own my own microscope. I know how to do a blood count, and I will do my own blood count and determine my lymphocyte count. So I probably do that once a month. And if my lymphocyte count is continuing up, and if the rate of increase is accelerating, then I'll call the hospital and tell them, look, I think we need to do another complete blood count. So I am going to be proactive and monitor the disease myself. Now, I haven't been doing that for quite a long time. I used to do it, but I kind of got lazy because I haven't had any symptoms. But lately I have noticed that when I go out and do something, like last week, I was out shoveling a little snow, and after only about 30 minutes, I was totally exhausted, which may be a consequence, at least in part, of my relatively low hemoglobin content in my blood. So that's where I am. What this means is that, I at some point in the future, can't really say when, maybe 3, 4 years, maybe 5 years, maybe sooner, I'm probably going to have to be treated for the chronic lymphocytic leukemia again. And I'm hoping that I don't develop an autoimmune condition that's attacking my red blood cells, because the treatments for that are kind of unpleasant. I really don't want to have to go through it, but the treatments for chronic lymphocytic leukemia are pretty easy, and the treatment I had before, 7 years ago, worked really, really well, and there's a good chance that it will work again. However, once my lymphocyte count gets up a little bit higher, I will go through a whole series of tests to determine the characteristics of my B lymphocytes and my CLL to see, what might be the best treatment for me. But the results of my most recent blood tests definitely say my leukemia is back and things are picking up, and, certainly within the next 5 years or so, I will be going back into treatment. So that's that. That's what I wanted to talk about today. I don't feel particularly bad. I put down getting tired by shoveling snow for half an hour to the fact that I'm in my middle 70s. But, maybe it's because partly that and partly my blood chemistry. So anyway, that's where we are today on the 28th of February, 2025. Now, I do have one more doctor appointment coming up on Monday, March 3rd, and that is my 2-year follow-up on my total knee replacement, and I will do a video after I see my orthopedic surgeon this coming Monday. Okay, thanks for watching.